In 1961, President Kennedy called on all Americans to rise to the challenges of the day. He knew that success depended upon the unity of efforts throughout the federal government and the nation. The Greater Boston Federal Executive Board, one of 28 across the country, fosters communication, coordination, and collaboration with federal, state, and local government agencies. This is your federal government, and I am your host, Diane LeBlanc. Hello, everyone. Today we are featuring the Social Security Administration's Office of the Inspector General, an independent unit established by law which is responsible for promoting economy, efficiency, and effectiveness in the administration of the Social Security Administration's programs and operations, and to prevent and detect fraud, waste, and abuse and mismanagement in those programs and operations. Our guests today are Patrick O'Carroll, who is the Inspector General for the Social Security Administration, and Scott Antolik, who is the Special Agent in Charge for the local area. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having us, Diane.
Thank you. Thank you both for being here. I'm going to start with you. You are the Inspector General for SSA with nationwide responsibilities. So you get to tell us a little bit about the history of the organization and its mission. Okay,
Diane. SSA separated from HHS in 1995. So in 1995-96, we started out as our Office of Inspector General. And with the independent agency, we then had to, create an infrastructure there, and that's sort of how I came over. I had been in government since the early 70s, and I was in the United States Secret Service. And when SSA became independent, I was recruited to come over and sort of set up the new Office of Investigations for Social Security. And one of the things that we were doing at the time was that we realized that the programs of SSA were under more attack and more issues there than it was in terms of an internal type of IG. And so anyway, I started out with setting up an Office of Investigations, and then from that, I guess about, maybe 5 years later, President Bush asked me if I'd be interested, or appointed me to be the Inspector General. So I took that position, and since then I've been doing that for about 10 years now.
Wow. So you've been there literally since the beginning.
Yes.
And so I think, all of our viewers probably know Social Security Administration, SSA, but you indicated going back in the history, you were actually part of another agency, the Department of Health and Human Services.
Yes.
So now you're an independent agency, and you have the Office of the Inspector General, which is independent, if you will, from the agency. Yeah, talk a little bit about that. What's the relationship between an IG's office and the agency that it is there for?
Well, I guess the reason for the Inspector General Act is that both Congress and the American public deserve to have an independent watchdog taking a look at an agency and reporting back on the effectiveness of the agency, and pretty much as you had said at the beginning, the waste, fraud, and abuse of it. And with our job on it is it's sort of a difficult, thin line that we walk on, in that we have to know SSA very well. So my office is located in the headquarters of SSA, and pretty much I pick up a lot of the intelligence about what's going on in the agency by just being present, and riding up and down the elevators, walking through the cafeteria at lunch. And then another part of it too is I try to sit in on executive meetings at SSA to get an understanding of what's the decision factors that are being put into protecting the program. Another one there is just also to be sitting at the table and always reminding everyone that they have to be watching out for improper repayments, watching out for fraud and those issues on it. So I got to say is that I'm independent. I report to Congress, report to the President, but also too is I have a relationship with SSA and their management.
Okay. So you mentioned where your headquarters office is. But organizationally, the Office of the Inspector General, I'm assuming that you have a field presence. We know that because of our other guest here today. So tell our viewers a little bit about what the organizational structure looks like, both in headquarters and then dispersed throughout the country.
Well, we're probably, I guess we're in probably the top 10 in terms of sizes of IGs. And our size of us is we're about 550 people. We're broken up in terms of, I guess, maybe about 250, almost half of our people are in our Office of Investigations. We have about 100 auditors that are in our Office of Audit. We have a group of attorneys that are used for civil monetary penalties and protecting SSA from the misuse of SSA's symbols and different things there. And also, too, is one of the things we're running into now is the misuse of SSA on the internet. So we have our attorneys taking a look at that and trying to keep that from happening. So anyway, of our 550 employees, we're located in about 75 locations across the United States. We have, as we hear with Scott here, we have the office here in Boston. We have an office in New Hampshire. We have an office in Connecticut, in this region. Anyway, and then also with besides our 75 units we have there, we also have another group of 25 units that we call our Cooperative Disability Investigative Units. And what they are is it's one of our agents, it's usually one employee from SSA, one employee from the state, and at least 2 local investigators. And what those units do is that when a person is applying for disability and it's felt that they're feigning injury or whatever on it, these units will go out and will investigate that. So we have about another 100 people on top of our 550 that are part of the cooperative disability units.
So in terms of the function of your office, I mean, does it pretty much break down into audits and investigations, or is it, how many more broad categories do you have?
Those are probably the 2 best categories, and I think where we're a little different from a lot of the other IGs out there is I got to say we have much more work than we have people for. So we try to partner wherever we can. And unlike, I guess, sort of operating in a vacuum where you just have auditors looking at, the operating of an agency, we work pretty closely. So we're co-located with an office audit with our investigative units. And as an example, if we're going to be taking a look at the finances of somebody that's supposedly watching out for the good of one of our beneficiaries, and we think that they're embezzling money or whatever, we'll send our auditors in, they'll audit that representative payee, as we call it, and then turn it over to the Office of Investigation. So we work real closely with that. We have special attorneys assigned to some of our offices to help in the prosecution of it. So I got to say is that we're a very, I guess, homogenous group here. So we have auditors and investigators working together.
Excellent. All right. Scott, I'm going to give you a chance to tell folks about your role as the special agent in charge here, located in the Boston office, and your geographic area of responsibilities.
I've been the special agent in charge here for Boston since the last 4 years. And we've got 10 agents that cover New England. That's all 6 states. So those agents basically conduct investigations in Social Security fraud. And my role, and for the most part, is liaison with other partnerships that we have with other law enforcement agencies and with local and federal prosecutors as well. So we have to ensure that we have good relationships with them. And also that the agents receive the proper training that they're supposed to have and have the correct tools and equipment in order for them to conduct their investigations.
So in terms of the major things that the Social Security Administration does that most of our viewers would relate to, I mean, when I think Social Security Administration, I tend to think of 3 major areas. Social Security cards. Everyone
Right.
gets one. Then I think, the basic Social Security check, that as people get older, they pay into Social Security, and then they reach a certain age and they get a Social Security check. And then the other major area being SSI, Supplemental Security Income, I think, for
Right.
those that are disabled and can't work. Are those the 3 big areas that you're working with, or are there others?
Those are the 3 big areas that we do work with. Benefit fraud basically is most of our caseload is we're working individuals who have defrauded the government based on the benefits that they're receiving. We also do a lot of cases that involve Social Security number misuse, which oftentimes leads into document type fraud or identity theft type issues. So we do a lot of cases with that as well. And the fact that basically everybody has a Social Security number, we can become involved in a lot of other investigations that other agencies are having. So we offer a lot of help and assistance in those investigations as well. So we're pretty active and we have a lot of casework for us.
So I'm guessing you have more of a caseload than you have folks to manage, but I think people work differently today. I mean, you've got your folks who are in the Boston office, but as you refer to, everybody's working together. You could conceivably would be working on something with people across the country.
Absolutely, and with other agencies. I mean, we work very well with other agencies due to the information that SSA has and the violations that happen when they misuse Social Security numbers.
So what, and this will be for either of you, what can you tell our viewers about how you detect fraud in these different areas without giving away too much?
Well, I guess I'll start it off and I'll let Scott become a little bit more what happens in this area on it. One thing that we have, which I didn't mention before when I was talking about the setup of this, is we have the largest anti-fraud hotline in government. So we're getting about 150,000 calls a year of people basically giving us leads and giving us information on people. And oftentimes, it's kind of complicated. One is that we can't, for those of you who are thinking about calling in and doing it, we can't respond back to you and tell you whether or not we opened up an investigation. So there's a bit of privacy on it. But when a person calls in, what we normally do is we'll then go against SSA's records. We'll take a look and see if it's an actual disability that the person has. And oftentimes we're going to be finding where a person will be calling and saying, hey, the person next door to me is on disability and I see him in their backyard doing a construction project. And what they might not know is that that person, although they are physically capable of doing it, they might have a mental disability that keeps them from working. So anyway, we'll take a look and we'll check on the leads on that, and we use that. And oftentimes we do that. Another way that we get a lot of our leads on our investigations is through SSA employees. And what Scott, I'm sure, will be able to say is that we go out, we talk to the employees in SSA offices. We give anti-fraud lectures to them. We explain to them how it goes. And oftentimes, they'll just refer it to us. And we have a pretty robust referral system now where they'll fill out a form, send it to us electronically, and then we'll go through the other checks on it and decide whether or not to investigate it.
Now, any sense of those calls that are coming from the general public? Any sense of what percentage of those turn out to be something that actually, turns into a case?
Oh, that's a very good question, Diane. I pay a lot of attention to that because what I'm trying to do on that one is to decide how effective our hotline is. And I'd say probably about 5% of what we get do end up being referred out to an office for investigation on it. And of that 5%, it really probably comes down to maybe 2% will end up in a prosecution. But, the best part of it and what we try to do with it is we're recording it, we're keeping the information on it, and so that if we do get other information later or better stuff that we can use for an investigation or see if we can tie it into some form of a conspiracy, then we'll go back and reinvestigate it.
So those are the really big cases.
Yeah.
And okay, Scott, what would you offer to
some of our
supplement?
best cases come from SSA employees due to the fact of their knowledge of the system and the benefits and the files themselves that they see. So they refer that to us, and we get a lot of good cases that way. Another way, too, is the fact that our relationship with other law enforcement agencies, they might be working something completely different, but they come across maybe a different name that their subject has or a different Social Security number. So then they'll call us, and we can become involved at that point. And those have turned into some big cases as well.
Every once in a while, you'll hear something in a local news story of somebody continuing to collect a Social Security check for a family member after that family member has been passed away. Is that prevalent, or is that a big thing?
I don't know if it's prevalent, but it does happen. I mean, unfortunately, we've had a case recently where the individual's mother had passed away. We don't know when, because he never reported it, and he wrapped her up in a blanket and kept her in the basement, and he continued to receive the Social Security benefits for a number of years. So that situation doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen.
What kind of penalties are there for these kinds of things? And obviously they probably vary from...
It's, well, what we're finding with that is that there's obviously a whole group of different prosecutions that we can do. But for the most part, it's a felony, where they're getting funds from the United States government. Oftentimes, the penalties will go anywhere from 1 to 10 years of imprisonment on it, fines, full restitution. And I got to say is that it usually depends on the different type of case on it, in terms of that. In some cases where it's the person doesn't have very many resources, what will end up with that is that we will ask for restitution from them. And then one of the interesting things is that as a person, they might have defrauded us early on in their life, but at a later point when they're going to be eligible for retirement benefits, we'll go after those benefits into the future ones and get the money back from it. But for the most part, the other part of it too is that if it's going to be a widespread fraud against the agency, similar to, we've had a couple major investigations that I'll probably talk a little bit more about later, but in a large investigation where there's a lot of people involved in it, we get a commitment out of the U.S. Attorney's Office that they're going to go for time to be able to send a message to the public that we don't want anyone to be committing fraud against Social Security. So I got to say on that one, it depends on the crime, how much money was lost by the government, and where in the country it is, and what's the priorities of the U.S. Attorney at the moment in that area.
So in terms of your office, you talked earlier about the organizational structure, some 500 employees. What does it actually cost to run the Office of the Inspector General? And so I'm interested in knowing what it costs, and then to maybe put that in perspective in terms of what do you get back? How much do you recoup for the American people?
Well, I got to say, it's probably one of my biggest jobs as the Inspector General is taking a look at what our costs are. I'm pretty much briefed every day on what's going on in terms of our expenses of the day. As it stands now, and it's sort of interesting, is that I think everybody's been watching the news in terms of that they were trying to fund the United States government. So the President just signed our appropriation the other day, and what we are at the moment is a little over $100 million a year to run our organization. And of that, where it gets sort of complicated and most people don't realize it, is 85% of that $100 million is just paying the salary of our employees and pretty much the brick and mortar of the buildings around us. And then with the other $15 million, that pays for pretty much everything else. And for that, what we're very proud of is that we're, at the moment, I think our return on investment is about 20 to 1. Okay. So when you take a look at that, we're bringing in about $2 billion a year between the money that we're identifying in terms of our investigations, which is probably about 1/4 of our savings, and about $1.5 billion is what we're finding in terms of savings from doing our audit work on it. So we're a very good investment to the public, and one of the things that happened was even when the government was in a shutdown mode, all of our agents did come to work every day, and it was recognized that the Inspector Generals were, with the return on investment by shutting down the Inspector General's office, was actually costing the taxpayers much more than what the investment is in our offices.
And that's a very interesting point. I was going to ask about the impact of sort of the sequestration and the government shutdown, what that meant for your office, because obviously whenever those things are talked about, one of the first things people think of is, will our seniors get their Social Security checks and all of the other things? But because your office, you certainly not only cover your costs, you reap in return so many, did you say billion?
Billions.
For the American people.
And again, that's one of the interesting things that happened with the government shutdown is that Social Security did keep its offices open. And we assured the public that they would get their benefits. And I guess what kind of to put a frame on this thing is over $1 billion a day goes out in benefits from our agency on it. So even if there is a small amount of fraud on it, 1% of $1 billion a day is a lot of money. And so anyway, because of that, it was necessary for us to come in. But I got to tell you, this has been a very difficult time, and in my own 40 years of time in government, I've never seen a time as it is now where there is, a feeling by the public that government is too large. There's a lot of resentment towards, the tax dollars that are going into the government. And I got to tell you, with our organization, we are, spending every taxpayer's dollar very carefully. We're trying to protect a program that touches every person in the United States. And what you got to realize is that we're, pretty much overseeing the protection of the largest social welfare organization in the world.
Mm-hmm. It's huge. It really is huge. Scott, you talked a little bit earlier about tips coming from Social Security Administration employees. You talked about tips coming from the public. What other tools, what other things do you use to detect fraud?
Well, like I mentioned earlier, the number one way to detect fraud for us is the SSA employee who actually sees the beneficiaries on a day-to-day basis during their interviews and looking at the application process. And another way, the public and I would say the other law enforcement agencies that we work with, they come across things that they call us about, and that ends up turning into an investigation as well.
So does your office at the local level do anything that would fall outside of the scope of investigations? Do you have any other responsibilities?
Well, we also do investigations on threats against government employees. So people who threaten SSA employees for whatever reason. We're not the primary lead on that, but Federal Protective Services and police as well. But we help in assisting in those investigations when that happens. It doesn't happen too often, but it does happen.
So it's very interesting. I mean, the law enforcement community, which you are part of, jurisdictional issues are always very interesting to me, and sometimes you can have multiple entities working on a single case. Any intriguing local cases that you can tell us about? I know that there's a couple I want to ask about, some stuff happening in New York and in Puerto Rico, but I think that's outside of your area. Anything here in New England?
In Boston, we've had a number of cases that we've worked joint with other agencies. We've had one in particular where a woman received 2 Social Security numbers fraudulently. She used one number to receive disability, and then she used another number to go ahead and work full-time without reporting that to SSA. At the same time, she defrauded HUD, and she did that by receiving public assistance housing, where she used one number to say she was the landlord, and then she used another number to say she was the tenant. So she was receiving a number of benefits, $300,000 fraud that we worked jointly with, and that was a very good case. Mm-hmm. And something that's kind of, you mentioned earlier, other things we might do unrelated to SSA is when the marathon bombing incident occurred, all federal agencies here in the New England area offered assistance, and we did, and we were there right away, and we offered data that we could help them with their investigation. I mean, obviously they're the lead, but every agency wanted to do what they can to help out, and we did.
Are you all part of the Joint Terrorism Task Force?
Yes.
Formerly part of that entity?
Yes.
Interesting. Okay. So some of the big cases that many people have heard about in the news. There's some stuff happening in New York, in Puerto Rico. I actually, in preparation for today, I read the testimony that you gave to Congress. What can you tell our viewers? I know that these investigations are ongoing, but it was a fascinating read. So whatever you can share would be appreciated.
I guess I'll start off with sort of chronological on it, is with Puerto Rico. And one of the things that when you read in these newspaper articles or seeing on the network news, is that these are very complex investigations. And one of the problems with Social Security is that we take the word of doctors when they say that a person's disabled. We take the word of the lawyers when they represent a person and they say they're disabled. And we take the word of, the non-attorney claimant reps that are bringing these people to us. And it becomes very, very difficult when there's a conspiracy there and they, collude together to defraud the government. So as an example, in Puerto Rico, what happened is that as people were losing their jobs in Puerto Rico and companies were closing, a facilitator who was a previous SSA employee was going out and telling them, hey, if you give me a certain amount of money, what I'll do is I'll introduce you to doctors and I'll introduce you to the people to get you on Social Security benefits. And so anyway, what we did in that case there is that we sent, and this is where it takes a long time, but we established an identity for an undercover agent to go in with this, it was introduced to the facilitator through an informant, and then the undercover then went through the whole process, and they were introduced to the doctors on it. They were given, you know, x-rays, they were doctored. We did a lot of information along those lines, and then it resulted in a major investigation on it. So I can't go into too much of the details of who did what or anything else because it's still being prosecuted. But anyway, as a result of it, we got a lot of attention on it. There was a lot of news. And then kind of just within the last month or so, I guess in the last month, what happened is that we had the culmination of about a 3-year investigation in New York City. And the only real similarity to Puerto Rico on it is that there was collusion there again between the doctors and the attorneys. And what was happening is people who were on public pensions, when they went on pensions with the disability, these people would approach them and they'd say to them, hey, on top of your pension that you're going to be getting from the New York State, if you give us 1 year of the benefits that you'll get, we will help you get on Social Security disability for it. And then what happened is that this large group of people got onto Social Security disability benefits, and then through us, by using, I guess, a comparison of who were the doctors, who were the lawyers, who were the different people involved, we're able to identify the conspiracy, and a large number of arrests were made.
That's it's fascinating to me. It really, really is. And these things don't just happen overnight. It takes, attention. It takes diligence. It takes being patient sometimes to, sort of crack those major cases.
And again, as I said, the biggest problem with it is it's all people we trust in most of these cases, and that's probably the hardest part of the whole thing, and the outrage of it is when you're seeing these people that you trust trying to defraud a program that is there to help people.
And very sad. Very, very, very sad. So what are the biggest challenges that are facing your organization?
Well, I think probably the biggest challenge on it that we're facing is that we've got much more work than we have people, and that's probably our biggest thing on it. Is trying to triage the information that we have coming in to make our decisions on what we can use our resources towards. And again, as I was saying before, one of those things that we do to try to combat that is through partnership. So what we're trying to find is that if we can partner with the Social Security Administration and use their resources to be able to help us in terms of looking for patterns of fraud, that one is what we're doing. And also too is now what we're trying to do, I guess again the challenge is for this thing is start using technology better. And so what we're telling SSA to do is when a person comes in, and you had mentioned earlier today about the SSI program. The SSI program is for the aged, the disabled on it, and it's for the destitute. And so what we're telling SSA to do now, and they are doing it, is to use financial information on it. So when a person comes in and says that they're destitute, we'll have SSA now run some checks and be able to see if they own property, if they own a house, if they have income coming in, if they have resources. So that's kind of one of the challenges that we're doing on that is that with the broad spectrum of people that, or issues that are out there, we're trying to use as much information as we can.
I mean, technology really does present a tremendous opportunity, I would think, for those in the investigative arena like yourself. Now, in that particular program, if somebody, gets on SSI, I mean, you hear they're on it and they're on it for life. Does your office, or is it part of Social Security, does somebody ever go back and look at the people who are on it to see if their circumstances have changed?
Wow, that's a very, very good question, because in fact that's one of the things I just talked about in front of Congress, was that one of the things that SSA does have is they have what are called continuing disability reviews. So when a person does go on disability, what they'll do is they'll take a look at the type of disability a person has, make a determination is this something that they could recover from? And then what they'll do is they'll set a target date, and they figure about every 3 years it'd be worth going out and checking with the person and say, hey, have you gotten better? Unfortunately, SSA, because of funding issue, has stopped doing them. Not stop, but they do it in a much less frequently than what we recommended. And that was the same thing with both the disability program and the SSI program. There's redeterminations for SSI. And in both cases, there should be done every about 3 to 5 years, and SSA has been postponing. There's a large backlog on it. But anyway, this year, probably because of our encouragement, Congress has taken a certain amount of money and delegated it specifically for doing continuing disability reviews. So we're hoping that will have a good effect on taking a look just to make sure a person who does get on disability doesn't stay there if their health gets better. And I guess one of the things that we think about now is that with medicine, there's so many advances happening in medicine. The person that years ago might have been disabled for life, they could be getting better and could come back into the workforce.
And hopefully they would. And I would hope that the majority of people who take advantage of this benefit, if their situation changed, they would do some sort of a notification. But it's important to have sort of the checks and balances in there for those that aren't, because they shouldn't be receiving a benefit that they're no longer entitled to.
Agreed. And the other part of it too is that even if one of our thoughts was when we're taking it these places where there's collusion between attorneys and doctors on it, they might not have the coaching with them. So when you bring them in 3 years on it, they might say something wrong. They might divulge information as saying, hey, I'm feeling pretty good. And then we take another harder look as to whether or not they really needed the disability.
Scott, if somebody is out there and they want to report something to your office, how do they do that?
There's a national number, 1-800-FRAUD hotline that we have at our headquarters that they can call. And also there's a duty line that we have locally, so they can call our office directly and or any Social Security office that they may want to call as well. That'll get referred to us eventually that we can look at then too.
One of the things we talk about these days is transparency in government. It's the big word. So in terms of your office and what you're doing, obviously we know if investigations are ongoing, there's not going to be a lot of information. But when your office does do a report, whether it's sort of internal or external, are those available for the American people to view?
Absolutely. And in fact, that's another good point that you just brought up is that as part of our transparency, and I guess in terms of getting into the 21st century, is that we are using social media. So we have a website, so SSA.gov. There's SSA.gov, which is the Social Security Administration website. We have a link off of that, plus we have our own that you can go to just by Googling us as SSA-OIG. We have most of our audit reports are on that are open to the public. We then also are using social media. So we are on social media. We tweet information out. We try to keep everybody fairly informed of what's going on. And I think that's working pretty good with the transparency. So social media helps us a lot.
So in terms of your goals for the agency, your priorities going forward?
You're leading right down the right path on this thing, because I do think that the solution for us is technology. Interesting enough is that, as I was saying, is that when I became a young agent 40 years ago, one of the things when you do an investigation, we would go to City Hall, the police department, whatever, show our credentials, go down into the basement of it, go through the 3x5 index cards and start looking for information. Now all that's done with a couple of keystrokes before you leave your desk. So my goal for us in the future is to get much more involved in financial intelligence. So again, one of the examples on it would be where it would take us weeks or months to identify a person's bank accounts so that we could get a subpoena to see if they were illicitly putting money into it. Right now, we can go on to pretty much an information broker type of thing. We'll find out pretty much where the person does their banking, how much money they have, if they own other resources, whatever on it. So my biggest goal for the future is to really start leveraging the type of financial information that are out there so that we can pretty much do all the background information on it, provide it to the investigators, and then have the investigators out there doing the investigation. And also, too, is that's the type of information that helps us in our audit reports, so that when we're doing our audit reports, we're taking a look at different forms of financial information and just different ways that there's systemic attacks being made towards SSA so we can plug them.
You've mentioned a couple of times now, you've been at this for 40 years. You're clearly very passionate about what you do and the service that you provide to the American people. what advice would you offer for anybody out there who might have children or grandchildren or interested in pursuing a career, along the lines that you've done?
I think, the best part of it is that what my recommendation to them is looking back on my career was I started out as an intern, so I'm a very big proponent of internships with government. And I think what it does is a couple things, is it'll give whoever, your friends, children, whatever, a chance to get a sense, is government for me? Is it, get in there. And one of the things that we do for it with a lot of our internships is put them into our hotline. And by being on the hotline, they're talking with the general public, they're hearing about the different frauds that are being done against the people. And then at the same time, too, they're learning how to use SSA systems to be able to check on the information. And to be truthful, that's our best recruiting method, is bringing people in through our allegation management division. And they learn how the programs work. They work with our auditors, they work with our investigators. And instead of just an unseen applicant that we're actually getting somebody who grew up with us, and it's working out quite well. So my biggest advice on that is besides looking at the SSA, or not the SSA, the jobs.gov type of website, is go to agencies like ours and volunteer. Ask if you can be an intern, ask if you can, do a student internship. And I think that's probably the best way into government now.
Excellent advice. I started as a student trainee myself, and you get some great experience. Scott, best job you ever had?
Best job I've ever had.
Good thing to say with your boss in here. But, what was your educational background? How'd you actually get here?
Well, I started, I have a degree in history, and I always wanted to work for the government. I just wasn't sure what it was. But after taking a number of tests, my first job was in law enforcement with the federal government as a Border Patrol agent. But I wanted to do more investigations, and so I ended up with this agency in '99, and I've been very happy.
Excellent. All right. So tell me, we've covered an awful lot of ground. What have I not asked? What do you think our viewers need to know that I've not asked you about?
Well, I guess one of the things on it is that, as I mentioned before, SSA is very large, very complicated. It's in the news all the time, and everyone's pretty concerned about solvency. And just a couple things on that. One is that we do a financial statement audit. So we audit SSA's books every year in conjunction with a public accounting firm. It's way too much for us to be able to handle ourselves. So we subcontract out with the financial accounting firm. And anyway, we go over the books of SSA, and it's been getting, for the last 15 years, it's used as one of the examples in government as having a clean financial statement and one of the best run financially agencies out there. So that's one of the issues that we didn't talk about on it, is that we're behind that. Another one that's sort of interesting, and we touched on a bit, was disability. And SSA at the moment is having a large influx of disability claims. And if you take a look at it, sometimes the press will take the impression that it's more and more people trying to defraud SSA. But in truth, what it is it's really the demographics. Is what's happening now is that pretty much, my generation, all the baby boomers are now maturing, they're coming in, and two things are happening. One is more and more of them are applying because of, the influx of baby boomers, so there's a high amount there. Another one that's sort of interesting is the workforce demographics have changed. There's many more women in the workforce than there were 30 years ago, so that group is coming in. We were finding that what's happening there is that the other part of it is with the economy. A lot of the people that, let's say you're my age, you get laid off from work, and while you were working, your back hurt, you were having a hard time standing up for long periods of time, but anyway, it was worth it because you were getting paid. But now all of a sudden you're no longer getting paid, your back is hurting, or you're having another type of a disability on it. A lot of those people then come to SSA looking for disability on it. So there is a large influx coming in, but I got to tell you is that sort of interesting is I take a look at it and our audit staff looks at it very closely, is that there aren't any, I guess the percentage of people getting approved for disabilities remain the same. So even though there's been a large influx, pretty much the appeals process and everything else that goes into the selection of it has been working. But we look very closely at that because, like everyone, we want to make sure that Social Security is there in the future.
Absolutely, and the disability issue that you raised, I mean, I've certainly seen, you know, that in the news, and you know, more people applying, but you don't necessarily hear the balanced picture of why. You hear the economy is bad, and people are, for lack of a better word, you know, faking a backache, faking mental illness, faking those things that are hard to prove or disprove. But you indicate that's not quite the full picture.
Yeah, and one of the other things that we're doing, and I mentioned a little bit earlier on it, is we have what we call our cooperative disability investigative units. And what happens with that is that if somebody, when they start going through the process of applying for disability, if it's felt by the examiners that this person just doesn't look right, they'll turn it over to this unit. And what these units do initially on it is they'll start doing record checks and taking a look. So as an example, let's say a person says that they're sight impaired. And what we'll take a look is and see if, you know, if they have driver's licenses, if they have other types of information on it. So we'll take a look and see that way. And then if we're finding that it really doesn't look right on a type of thing, is ours are the vans that go out there and they'll videotape people, you know, in their normal daily lives to see if it does reflect what they're saying in their, you know, when they've applied for the disability. So we have lots of pictures of, as an example, a person will say that they're, well, I guess one of the best ones, I showed this picture to Congress, is we had our team go out on a suspicious one and they film this individual, and the individual comes walking out of his house normally, walks in, gets into his car, drives over, goes to a drugstore, walks into the drugstore, goes, and the whole time we've got our camera going, goes and buys a cane, drives to the Social Security office, parks a block away, and then with the cane hobbles into the SSA office. We then watch him hobble out. He looks around, throws his cane in the car, and here's the best part, drives back to the drugstore and turns the cane and returns the cane, gets his money out back from them. So anyway, we filmed the whole thing, and as a result of it, that individual never got on disability.
There you go. How incredible is that? So the other point that you mentioned, and I'm so glad you brought that up, is that you, working with, you know, an outside contractor, review the solvency of Social Security Administration. And SSA, Social Security Administration, Social Security itself, it becomes a very political topic. And it's important that you have that independent audit to look at solvency. So how far out, if I were to go online and look at one of your reports, what would it say about the solvency of the program?
Well, I guess the financial statement audit is going to say is that what SSA is portraying to the public in terms of what its assets are, what it's coming in, is accurate. And the biggest issue I think that most people don't realize is that Social Security pretty much up to now has been the people that are working and paying the FICA taxes, more money has been coming in terms of people paying into Social Security than has been going out. But then, Diane, as I was saying, is what the demographics are changing now is that we have more people retiring than people in the workforce. So really, for the first time, money is being taken out of the trust fund and then being put towards the payments of it. And what's going to happen with that is that unless we get more workers on it, eventually there'll be more and more money having to come out of the trust fund, and that's where the solvency issues come in. And in most cases, we're looking at 2035 is where it's going to be, the trust funds are going to be having a lower level on it that it becomes a major concern. And probably in the next 3 to 5 years, there's going to be concerns in terms of the disability trust fund, which is a separate trust fund on that. And in both cases, we inform Congress what's been going on with SSA. All of the financial statements and work that we do is reported to Congress. SSA has an actuary that is also taking a look at what's coming in, what's going out. That's reported to Congress. And then there's a Social Security Advisory Board that too is overlooking it. So really between all of us, we're looking at the solvency of SSA, reporting it to Congress. And I got to tell you, it's something Congress has to pay a lot of attention to and be looking into for the, the future to make, I guess, to assure everybody that's paying into Social Security now that it'll be there for them.
Absolutely. Scott, anything else to add?
I would say we're busy. Busy, and we have a lot of good cases, and like the IGA said, I mean, we're very active with our partnerships, and we definitely keep busy.
So in terms of the partnerships, I mean, we've talked about you've worked with the FBI, you work with HUD, attorney generals. Who all are you working with?
Everybody.
Everybody.
Pretty much, right? Because everybody has a Social Security number, so we go across the board with just about every federal agency that's there, and a lot of times with the locals as well.
Excellent. And I know, sort of prior to this, when we were talking, you were just, bragging on your staff.
Yeah, I think that's, one thing that we really like, or I always like to do, is I'm really here representing the 550 of our people that come to work every day, very dedicated. In many cases, our investigators are out there with law enforcement all the time, risking their lives, watching out for this program. And I got to say is that we've got an excellent organization that I'm very proud of, and it's one of those things that, again, I'm sure as we were talking about before, is that I think one of the best things for government is the fact that we all come to work every day, looking forward to coming to work. It's great to serve the American public, and it's good to have this type of an organization to be watching over one of the most valuable programs in the world.
You know what? I think that's a perfect note to end on.
Well, thank you.
There you go. All right. Well, I want to thank Inspector General O'Carroll and Special Agent in Charge Antolik for being with us today and for helping us to better understand the mission of the Social Security Administration's Office of the Inspector General and their role in protecting the public interest. I thank you for watching, and I hope that you will continue to join us as we feature other federal agencies on your federal government.